All right, so on the back of the horse, you can see a bit of the gold trim effect that we're going to be trying to achieve here. I'm starting with a black base coat over top of all of my gold trim. I'm going to now begin to lay a layer of black mixed with red oxide, just like I did with the leather. This is going to give the gold a warm undertone. We want to try and achieve a rich, warm gold with that'll help create a nice contrast with all of the blue on the figure and create some very interesting um, points of contrast and detail that'll help break up all of these cool tones throughout. So I'm just being careful here to lay down this first base coat, but I'm also trying to leave a bit of that black lining underneath. Let's say I'm covering about 90% of my black base coat. All right, so on the next layer, I'm now adding a bit of kind of warm yellow to my red oxide mixture. This is going to subtly shift it more towards the orange tones. At this point, I'm covering, let's say, 80% of the previous layer, focusing mostly on the upward facing areas, trying to really get that edge highlighted and just pointing it towards the light. Don't want to cover everything. I do want some of that really deep warm brown underneath. So you can see as on this arc of the reins, the flags on the reins, I'm gonna follow that same arc on each one. It's really important that I get that highlight to match on each one of those That's going to make the non-metallic consistent with each other. Consistent reflections is key to making the effect work. It's on this back facing arc. Now instead of painting the top of the volume, I'm painting more the, if you think of it like a ridge shape, almost like a prism shape. I'm painting the raised edge. So for the little Maltese crosses, I'm going to hit the the top the top edge of each cross and then the front facing volume of the cross and make sure I get each of the little edge highlights. These are some very tiny elements. Sometimes just a little dot is enough to um, create the effect. All right, so now I've added even more of that warm yellow, and I've also added just a touch of ivory to the mixture to give it some opacity. Uh, Warm yellow doesn't have a lot of coverage, so you got to add a little bit of white or ivory to the mixture to help give that coverage we're looking for. Same thing again, where I'm covering about, say, 80% of my previous layer and just trying to make sure I get that arc the same on each one. I'm painting a thin little thin little line on that center ridge using the side of the brush to make that edge highlight. Here I'm on that technically downward facing plane, but it's still facing the viewer. I'm adding a little bit of that warm, a little bit of a light reflection on the lower facing plane, but it's still forward facing to the viewer as opposed to the top facing plane on the back the back arcs that are facing away from the viewer that will have a darker reflection of things that are behind the figure. So there you can see I didn't cover that entire top edge. I want to create small little gradients even with inside of the edge highlights. So I'm constantly just moving, pushing the light upwards, creating more and more contrast. Uh, just like we did on the steel before, the level of contrast on non-metallic metal should be the most of any part of the figure to really create that shiny effect. This is on here on this compound curve shape. I'm trying to focus more light on uh, the part of the curve that is flat facing to the viewer. And then paint the edges. So on the Maltese crosses, I want the, just like I did before, I want that center ridge, but also where it curves down on the bottom. I want that nice sharp reflection on that small little plane. And on this tiny one, just four little dots is enough to place the lights. Hey, here I'm gonna restore just some of those dark reflections back into the gold. So I'm going back to my original mixture that's thinned out a bit to add some of those dark reflections back in and create even more contrast in that volume. Okay, so I've added even more ivory and more cold yellow to my mixture. Now it's going to really start to feel shiny as you get closer and closer to white. Just focus on getting the edges nice and crisp and painting the front facing volumes. Something just like with the steel where we tried to maintain some of that uh, blue midtones. It's very easy to apply too much coverage to your gold, and then you've lost all the yellow midtones, and it no longer has that gold sensation to it. So here at the little corner, I want the most light there. That's the part that faces, and then hit that top really thin edge highlight. Now just a couple little dots. I'm not again not covering everything that I all my previous work. Just want to paint inside the previous layer. Put this little spark of light in the bottom corner as it curves around. It's a small little touch just to give it an extra little point of interest. Anytime you have a plain transition on metallics, you tend to get a little bright reflection. Here, just glazing a little color back in with the yellow. If it gets if it gets too bright, easy enough to just use specifically like Chimera yellow is very powerful and covers over top of white really nice to get a super saturated yellow. With the ivory, just hitting some of these edges and really trying to create those final reflexes of light. I tend to not use pure white just because if I want to go brighter in a certain spot, I always have the option to go to pure white. But if I stop here at like an ivory or sunray, I can I always have the opportunity to add a touch more light if I need. really the hardest part of painting any. I know non-metallic metal is sometimes intimidating or hard to learn to paint. Once you get a good understanding of where the reflections could be need to be placed, it's a rather simple technique. Honestly, it's no different than any other layering or highlighting. It's just knowing where to place the lights to achieve that illusion. All right, so on the back side of the curve, I am using a more ochreish tone on. I've mixed a little bit of the teal into the yellow instead of the red oxide. This is going to make it a bit more green. Um, and we're not going to use this towards the sun side reflection, but on the back side to create these volumes on the reverse side, and this will help give that warm cold contrast on the two separate facing planes of the metallic. And there you can see it looks quite olive, kind of like an olive drab, but it's just we just need enough to separate, give some definition to that volume also. I won't go as bright on the back side as I do on the front, just like we did with the teal on the steel. The cold side never gets the same value as the main reflection. The main reflection should always be the brightest. But this just helps define the shape and give a secondary reflection. You can see on the chains and on this lower part of the trim, it helps define that shape better. So instead of using the warm gold, I'm using the tenebrous teal, cold yellow, and the ivory in a mixture together to make a more kind of gray green. If you mix yellow with black, uh, like a pure cold yellow with black, it tends to look kind of greenish. And then if you add just a bit of white back to it, I'll add the light that you need. All right, so this is just a cleanup step here where I've base coated around the Maltese crosses. I'm now going back in with my blue, which is just phthalo blue mixed with ivory. And I'm just trying to clean up the black lining around the crosses, get back in between these tiny little nooks or whatever in between each element. Find it oftentimes easier with when doing that really thin black lining to paint the black and then creep up on the black line from both sides to get that really thin, narrow black lining. Right, just adding little touches of black back in here to really help define these shapes and create even more contrast. Make it, the more contrast, the shinier it looks. And just blend these together. Get a little more of that red oxide and warm yellow mixture. And then just little touches of like